A vote to change Venezuela's constitution has sparked violent protests. After winning the vote, President Nicolas Maduro will replace the elected lawmakers with his own nominees. For the opposition, that's unacceptable.
We do not recognize the fraudulent process. For us, it doesn't exist, and we are going to continue fighting until the government re-establishes constitutional order and democracy, for Venezuelans to be able to fully exercise our rights.
But President Maduro remains defiant and has labeled his opponents puppets in foreign hands.
Today, a spokesperson for Emperor Donald Trump said that they would not recognize the results of Venezuela's Constituent National Assembly election. Why the hell should we care what Trump says? We care about what the sovereign people of Venezuela say.
Despite the widening political divide and rising violence, international pressure against Maduro's government has been limited to statements of condemnation. But that may be changing. The European Union has signaled it won't support the latest constitutional changes.
The European Union condemns the excessive and disproportionate use of force by security forces. The government of Venezuela has a responsibility to ensure respect for the rule of law and fundamental rights such as freedom of expression and the right to peacefully demonstrate.
The United States is also considering sanctions on Venezuela, but blocking sales of oil, which is the country's only source of cash, is reportedly still off the table. And with money to spend and armed law enforcers on his side, President Maduro has given no sign that he will compromise. Mobin Nasir, TRT World.
Well, for more, Miguel Angel Santos joins me now live. He's a senior research fellow for international development at Harvard University. Thanks so much for joining us. First, let's explore the threats of sanctions here, regardless of whether you think they'll be effective or not. If the U.S. doesn't target the sale of oil, what tools are actually left to put real economic pressure on Maduro?
Well, the tools, it's the ones they have used already, which is imposing sanctions on government officials that, according to U.S. investigations, are believed to carry wrongdoing business and seize their assets in the United States. That has already happened with 13 government officials, and in case there are more involved in wrongdoing, it should expand. And individual sanctions are different than those imposed on the country.
But there is a risk that any sanctions will only make business people in Venezuela, many of whom don't support Maduro in the first place, suffer even more.
Well, not the individual sanctions. I totally agree with you that imposing sanctions on the country, Venezuela exports nowadays 700,000 barrels per day to the U.S., cutting those up to zero imposes on Venezuela a burden of some $10 to $11 billion, which is 40% of exports. That will be imposing on a population that has been subject to a deep humanitarian crisis, to even further deteriorating of that, without having much possibility of changing or even marginally increasing the prospects for change. So I believe sanctions to the country and the way of oil sanctions will only fuel the narrative of the government and do not have the chance to marginally increase the likelihood of political transition.
Okay, then help us better understand the targeted sanctions you're talking about, these individual sanctions you've mentioned. How exactly would they work, and how would they punish Maduro where it matters?
Well, first of all, if these officials have been doing things wrong involving drug trafficking or any other way of money laundering, they should be processed and their assets should be seized and restored to the country at some point. So that it has to happen without even talking about transition. The way this can provide for a transition is there's individuals beneath these characters that are supporting the Maduro's government, and the threat of those sanctions amplifying and including them at some point might actually lead them to change their opinion and stop supporting Maduro. That's a way that has proved to be weak, but in any case, these sanctions do not impose a damage on Venezuelans, but rather on government officials. And as such, they should be explored and deepened.
Okay, Miguel Angel Santos, thank you so much for joining us there from Harvard University.